quick introduction, and then as we go through this, if you have questions, please feel free to enter them into the GoToWebinar questions section. And at the end, we'll leave a little bit of time, and we'll try to address all the questions available. So hopefully everybody has their pizza and is in eating position. My name is Chris Miller. I've been with AdvizeX now for about 6 years. My current role is the Director of Solution Engineering, and the team that I have, really a couple teams, are focused on architecture and cloud automation, cloud build. So we're going to talk a little bit about automation today and how various companies are using automation within their organization and the different types. And really that kind of aligns to infrastructure automation, workload automation, and automation for developers. And we'll go through that a bit, just understand the differences and the needs there and how people are leveraging automation to solve problems in those areas. And then finally, how EMC's engineered systems can help speed up your adoption if it's the thing that your organization is trying to accomplish around automating IT. So if we look at why organizations are adopting IT from a business perspective, it's a lot of the usual suspects. So many organizations are going through a digital transformation that's been sort of brought on by this new cloud era that we live in. As we all know, in IT, we are continued to be piled with responsibility and tasks, yet no extra hours in the day. So folks are being overworked. There's a lot of stress. The business has high demands for fast response, largely because of the competitive nature of the world we live in today. And then we're trying to figure out all of these things and juggle these different priorities along with dealing with emerging technologies like IoT and some of the things that are starting to emerge in the marketplace. Budget constraints are a big problem for folks. Every year IT budgets are shrinking. And there's been, a migration to cloud to help relieve some of that. But what we're finding is, people aren't necessarily saving the money they thought they would. So we're still under that sort of budget constraint with everything that we do in IT. And then finally, just the pace of change that we have to deal with within IT. It's becoming more and more difficult to manage traditional IT in the old sense, where we build run books and we enable people to do things. The changes are occurring so frequently that that's been causing issues in folks trying to build out with their cloud strategy and integrate on-prem, SaaS, IaaS in the cloud, and so forth. That complexity is making the old process difficult. So automation helps alleviate that, and we'll go through how that works with most organizations. So we look at the use cases. There's a number of them, but at a high level, there's really sort of 4 ways that we categorize automation. And the first one would be business process automation. So think of this as you just hired somebody. You need to get them a phone. You need to get them an email account. You need to provision their applications. You need to get them some sort of device they can work from, et cetera. And back-end set up in the payroll system, et cetera. And in that, organizations require multiple silos across different business units within the operations teams to achieve that. And automating those processes is something that most businesses would like to achieve, as it creates efficiencies for everybody involved outside of IT as well as within IT. The second major use case we see is we're classifying as workload automation. So think of that from a virtualization perspective. It'd be your VM and everything on top of it. So the OS, the configuration of it, the agents and the software that you install as a standard baseline, security configuration, et cetera. And that's really the provisioning of virtual resources and application components. Finally, third, we have infrastructure automation. And just think of this as the physical layer. So this would be automating the deployment of the hypervisor, other physical resources, configuration of the network, storage network to backup. And this has been one of the more challenging things to achieve. As you look at, most modern infrastructures are composed of various hardware vendors with different capabilities, different levels of support for APIs, for control, and lack of plugins and capabilities. And so we'll talk a little bit about how we can overcome that by leveraging SDDC. And then finally, automation for developers. And this is really sort of the mode 2 that people talk about with, agile, continuous integration, DevOps-y type of things, where we're automating the build of an application, we're automating deployment of that application, and we're making that quick and repeatable, so that instead of following the old methodology of 6 months of waterfall planning to get to a new release, we can bring those releases down to a more incremental and more frequent state, which allows us to get features and functionality and bug fixes out quicker for our customers. So these are the four main categories, and each one of them has different needs and different tools, and we'll talk a little bit about those individually as we move forward. Why are we doing this, right? Like anything else, we need to have a typo apparently in our slide when I copy and paste. Sorry about that. That should say expense reduction. So that is one big need for automation. And if you think about that, if you don't have a human being involved in the task, then you obviously don't need to consume their time. They can focus on other things, and that brings us some operational expense reduction. We also have the need for predictable service outcomes. And really what that means is, for example, if I have a run book, I get comfortable knowing that I know that run book. If it changes, then I don't necessarily change my procedures in my head. And documenting all that is a lot of work. So we leave some predictable service outcomes because we have Snowflake configurations that aren't part of our standard. And when that happens, it just becomes that more difficult to operate and to optimize. And I apologize because there is going to be some font issues here. Apparently my last minute changes may have wreaked havoc a bit on some of these. We want to have a common operational model. And what I mean by that is we're seeing organizations sort of follow the bimodal approach of we're going to run traditional infrastructure with this mode 1, how we've always done it, and then we're going to create this new cloud team, we're going to run a mode 2. And so we've sort of decided that that's necessary for an agility perspective for the organization, but that creates a whole new set of challenges around a new set of tools, a new set of operational procedures, and things don't integrate. So I think the long-term vision that we see and that what we're trying to help customers bring together, and as well as the OEMs as well as part of that, is to come up with this sort of common platform that can manage mode 1 and mode 2, cloud native and traditional, in a similar way with a similar set of tools so we can apply the required business and security policies and so forth without having to have separate teams and separate management in the long run. Public cloud integration is another need as we start to consume more public cloud services like applications and IaaS. Being able to bring that into the fold and make that part of our automation and our run book is a necessity. And then finally, just agility, being able to give people the tools they want. This is a very heavy need in the developer use case. And so if we can bring all of those things together through automation, then we can create business value. How we sort of look at this is then, all right, everything we're designing here for automation is a platform. It's a service delivery platform. And a lot of times what we see is folks look at the technology stacks that are available, that are being marketed by the OEMs, and they try to figure out a way they're going to consume that and then drive it into the organization because they see some inherent value there. In automation, particularly, a lot of times IT sees the value in saving themselves time. In other cases, they see it as a threat because they feel like that will make their job go away. In reality, we don't see people firing folks once things are automated. What we see is a shift in focus around, we'll say, work that brings value to the company as opposed to just keeping the lights on with clicking and policy management. How we approach that design, instead of looking at it from bottom up, is we work with organizations and we encourage organizations when they're taking this approach to do the same. To look at their IT service management process requirements, to look at the desired business outcomes, and to look at the application architecture that needs to be supported on the platform, and bring all those things together. And despite the type of application, whether it's cloud native or more traditional, there's really these sort of 4 pillars of a platform that have to be accomplished, right? We need infrastructure to run workloads. We need telemetry so that we can monitor the capacity management, understand our compliance, for example, with those SLOs that we set with the business. We need a way to control things. In the case of automation, we need a cloud management platform that can provide that level of control. And we need to be able to secure anything that we put within that platform. And so our approach when we look at this is let's do this to drive toward a business outcome, factoring in how we operate and the application architecture. And then we want an integrated platform. We want to move to a programmable infrastructure, and we want to be able to scale that cost effectively. So that's the high level view of what goes into this. And as part of the overall view of automation within the organization, these things need to be considered. The other thing I'll throw out there is in general, as we get into the technical side of it, is transforming into an automated environment is not something that you do as a project and walk away from it. You always now continue to operate in this new mode of infrastructure as code and automation. And so we recommend that you take a sort of look at it as a journey and take more of a practical approach in doing this. And in some cases, folks try to, do a big bang and accomplish all these things at once. In other cases, this is sort of the suggested path that we would recommend. In order to automate, you need to have some sort of API into your infrastructure and the ability to control it. And we think the easiest way to do that is to leverage the software-defined data center. Because you move all your intelligence into software, you free yourself up from specific hardware, meaning that I can now take advantage of that new feature to automate it, but I couldn't before because I would have had to go out and spend millions of dollars and buy new hardware to support it. So by going to a software-defined data center, you sort of take away the dependency on specific hardware for providing the infrastructure capabilities that you would need to automate and run workloads. After you have the baseline, the sort of the foundation set up, then the next step really is let's look at automating the workloads themselves, and that would include developer automation. And then finally, the ongoing, once you get all the way to the right, once you've got that up, the ongoing task then is to continue to automate and iterate through improving how you automate things. For example, if you get provisioning done in sort of in stage 2, when you're in the integration stage, you're really looking at things like I get a certain number of calls to my help desk for common issues like, I don't know if it's password resets or I need to expand a disk or I need to reboot something. And typically we'll know what the response is for those simple issues. And they end up being sort of gnats, right? They buzz around, they're interrupting the work. And so what we do on the integration side is look at what are some of those repeatable tasks that could be accomplished by somebody driving a request through a portal or automatically happen once we see certain things in the environment like high CPU usage or a disk is almost full, so that we can basically create an infrastructure platform that responds to those conditions without the need for human interaction. And that, in ways for security, is a huge benefit because obviously if something is happening from a security perspective, if a system can respond and mitigate that risk automatically, that's going to happen much quicker and it's going to lower your risk exposure as opposed to having to call it into a desk somewhere, create a ticket, and wait for an individual to service it. So just to keep in mind that, once you go down this path, this is sort of the new way that you're going to operate in the future, and it really does take more than just a technology stack, but an organizational shift, training, people, and process to go with that. Otherwise, it will struggle being successful. So with that, we'll talk about the various use cases for automation and how we achieve that with SDDC, as well as some of the engineered systems. So that first layer of infrastructure automation is now available with VMware Cloud Foundation. And I say it's now available. We've always had the ability to automate infrastructure in the past, but it's been very complicated and it's not something that most people spend a lot of time on, especially since when you look at a hypervisor, you kind of lay out your cluster ahead of time and you start to fill it up, and you're really not waiting for, hypervisor to be provisioned to get back to the business. You're waiting for an application. But now with Cloud Foundation, VMware has made that simple. And I think that, we recommend starting with this because the idea is you save time, and that time that you save, then you reinvest in further automation, and you continue to do that as you go through that journey. And when you get to the right side of the journey, what you find is you're doing less manual tasks, more automation work, and people are all contributing to that. So how Cloud Foundation is going to enable that for an organization is by providing a hyper-converged software-defined data center platform that really works both in the public cloud as well as the private cloud. From a public cloud perspective, it's not something that you interface with, but it's powering the VMware on Amazon as well as SoftLayer and the other VMware clouds. So this is how cloud providers are providing automation for provisioning resources. You can bring the same exact technology then back home and run it in your private cloud. And it's really comprised of 3 key SDDC components. vSphere, one being your compute virtualization, vSAN for your storage virtualization, and NSX for your network virtualization. That's all sort of wrapped up and managed by a tool called SDDC Manager. What SDDC Manager is responsible for doing is this deployment of the hypervisor, the configuration of the nodes, the storage policy, and the network switching in the environment, creating policy-based provisioning enablement so you can adjust your, say, storage policies and now provision into those for your data protection and your performance needs. And the final, I think probably the most attractive part of SDDC Manager for most folks is dealing with lifecycle management. So that's patching and upgrading your SDDC stack. And so for those of you who don't have an SDDC stack or haven't experienced one, what you wind up with when you create an SDDC stack is a set of dependencies between vCenter, vSphere, NSX, and vSAN. And most of us are used to the dependencies between vCenter and vSphere, and we can plan accordingly. But when you add in other components like NSX and vSAN and Horizon View and vRealize Automation, now you have more dependencies that you're concerned about. And just to kind of give you an example, our professional services spends a lot of time with customers just planning for these upgrades, making sure that we understand the current versions that they're running, the feature set that they're using, and where they'd like to go, and then mapping that out in terms of which pieces do we upgrade first and so on to make sure that the stack still works when we're done. SDDC Manager takes all of that work off the plate. We'll talk about how it does that, but essentially when you decide you're going to upgrade your system, you schedule it and you now operate your iPhone or your infrastructure just like your iPhone. So you would go to the App Store and say update, wait for it to download and complete. That's exactly what happens with the entire infrastructure stack via SDDC Manager. And if you look at that stack, that includes your storage, your networking, and your compute. How SDDC Manager then works is sort of organizes infrastructure into what we call workload domains. A workload domain, you can think of that as a dedicated vSphere cluster. And that gets provisioned through SDDC Manager. So you no longer have to do Kickstart or manually mount ISOs and all those things. SDDC Manager, and through the use of its imaging appliance, will image all of your hosts and then bring them into a cluster based on your resource needs. And there's really three types of workload domains. There's a management workload domain, which is required, and this is where all the management systems reside. And then we have virtual infrastructure and virtual desktop infrastructure workload domains. Depending on which choice you make, SDDC Manager will provision all the necessary resources. So if you choose a virtual infrastructure domain, you'll get NSX, vSphere, and vSAN in a cluster with the vCenter. If you choose the virtual desktop infrastructure, it will actually deploy Horizon View for you, configure a desktop pool with the image of your choosing, and stand that up, which is great because that does save a lot of time, and we normally do those types of engagements. It takes us at least a week just to stand up the infrastructure. Through SDDC Manager, because everything's sort of pre-planned, your network infrastructure, your IP addressing, and all that built into the system, you're able to essentially tell it to spin up VMware View, and you can have an entire stack stood up in less than a day. You can have multiple workload domains run in parallel, and each one of those is going to get a dedicated vCenter server, an NSX manager, and an NSX controller cluster. And while I don't go through licensing typically in these, I will say that looks a lot like, hey, there's vCenter sprawl, right? So I need to buy a bunch of vCenters now. That first license for the management domain is something you need to bring. But for each of the workload domains that you create within Cloud Foundation, the vCenter is covered by the Cloud Foundation licensing. So there is no need to deal with extra expense there. This is really looking at the software that we can customize on top of the stack. And what's in Lifecycle Management right now is the core, right? So vSphere, NSX, and vSAN. But we can use SDDC Manager currently to deploy Horizon. And then we can integrate vRealize Suite with it. And components of the suite are also deployed, like vRealize Operations Log Insight, but not automation in business yet. VMware has a goal with Cloud Foundation to bring the entire stack of the vRealize Suite and the Horizon Suite into full lifecycle management such that you can deploy all of those components and press a button to update the entire stack. They're starting with the core foundation, and over the next year or two, you'll start to see additional things being brought in for full lifecycle management. Consumption options vary, but it's a lot of the usual suspects. So we can choose to use qualified vCN ready nodes, which are supported by a number of vendors right now. Cisco has recently added to that list as well, so UCS is now supported. Qualified networking at the top of rack is going to be Cisco or Arista, which covers 95% of the market. There's also the integrated systems, which we'll talk a little bit about later, specifically Dell EMC VxRack SDDC. And for folks in Asia that run Fujitsu, they also have a system available. Finally, on the public cloud side, as mentioned earlier, we've got the VMware on AWS. We've got the VMware vCloud Air, and we've got IBM SoftLayer available now, and that's how these things are provisioning the resources for you in the clouds. SDDC Manager, just to give you a quick view of it, it's a centralized manager. It's supposed to simplify things and give you a quick snapshot of overall infrastructure state. There's a number of services that are packaged with SDDC Manager, including a hardware management service, which is how it interfaces with switches to do configuration, as well as the hosts. There's a lifecycle manager system, which is handling updates and patching. And then we've got some resource management and workflow service engines as part of that as well. The lifecycle manager is where the magic's at. So this is where we're turning infrastructure into essentially an iPhone. This is where you'll get notification when updates are available. You'll have the ability to download and schedule those updates, and you can view and track the status and remediate from there. And realistically, then that's made up of several components, which obviously store the patches and upgrade bundles. We've got a backup store where we can temporarily store things during upgrades, and then a database that's keeping status and history. And so those all work together then to formulate lifecycle management. And I believe next slide, we have some screenshots coming up here. You can take a look at that. Also integrated is vRealize Log Insight. So it comes deployed by the system. And for those of you who haven't used it, it is infrastructure logging and reporting. Probably one of VMware's hidden gems, one of my favorite tools. But this will allow you to then automatically have all of the hosts in the environment, logging and switches and so forth, logging to a central log aggregator, which then you could forward off outside of the system. And another part of that is also vRealize operations. So both of these will get deployed with Cloud Foundation, and all of the workload domains that you create will be automatically configured to talk to these systems. And then again, that gives you sort of the insight, if you recall, the telemetry pillar for the service delivery platform is integrated with the system. So Lifecycle Manager really is where I think a lot of the magic's at. So let's talk about that. From a patch and upgrade perspective, if you were to log in, you would see at the top of your screen, hey, there's a patch available. Let's go ahead and take care of that now. So when we click it, we can actually view the individual downloads and updates that are available for us. We can choose to download them ahead of time and update when ready. And that update gets applied on an individual workload domain basis. So for example, if I've got a VxRack system with a workload domain for VDI and a workload domain for virtual infrastructure, I don't need to update those all together. Typically what you'll do is you'll update your management domain, and then you'll leverage the lifecycle tool to update the individual workload domains, which means that it gives you a chance to keep things on older versions if, for example, you need to update backup software or something like that. But it does not require a full system update. You'll get a summary of what's available. You'll get a choice to schedule when you want to apply those updates. So if you are comfortable with the system and the automation, then you can essentially schedule it to happen in the middle of the night and go home and sleep well knowing that your system is being updated for you. It works a lot like VUM, where it will automatically roll servers into maintenance mode, vacate VMs through vMotion, put the host in maintenance mode, provide the update, bring it back, rinse and repeat. So you will not be down during the update, but obviously, like any other system, you want to go through a few of them, make sure you're comfortable with it, and then you can sort of put it on autopilot mode from there. Then you look at handling dependencies is another thing you need to do in any sort of updating automation. One of those would be, hey, we have a dependency for a different bundle that we need to add first. For example, maybe we need the NSX bundle before we can update vSphere. The system will tell us that, and we could pre-download, pre-stage all of those dependencies. Once the required dependency has been updated and installed, then the original update that you wanted to perform now becomes available. So that's it in a nutshell. And really, I'm excited about it because, back in the day when I did this as a full-time job as an automation engineer, I spent a lot of time on the physical infrastructure and trying to get that right. The idea that I would be updating my my network devices, my firewalls, my servers, and my storage all in one big push button method was really a pipe dream back then. And with SDDC now, it's something that we can realize without a whole lot of work. So you don't have to build the automation. It just shows up on the floor and it's ready to go. So with that, then the next layer in use case is workload automation. And VMware provides a vRealize suite to cover that aspect. The method for that is part of the suite is vRealize automation. And what vRealize automation does is it provides a cloud management platform with policy-based governance. And this is going to allow you then to have a self-service portal where we can deploy and manage infrastructure, applications, and any other custom service. So a way to think about that, as I mentioned earlier, business process automation. For a lot of large enterprises, there's a separate service management tool, either a BMC or a ServiceNow or something like it, that folks have implemented for business process automation. One of the things we find is in the smaller organizations that don't necessarily have a lot of funds and a lot of people, those tools are out of reach in terms of cost. And they do know that they need an infrastructure automation capability, One of the nice things about vRealize automation is if you have the knowledge and you're able to extend and build your own workflows, which you can do over time with experience and training, as long as something has an API, you can service it. So a lot of the functions that some of those expensive service management tools provide can be automated with vRealize automation as well. And we see that happening in smaller organizations where VRA essentially becomes the portal for everything. Now, how is it doing this, right? So it leverages a blueprinting system where you can build micro components, if you will. So those components can be VMs, applications, security policies, configurations, and so forth. And through a visual design canvas, we're able to link those things together and specify how many machines are in a blueprint, which application components we're going to deploy on top of those machines, where do we get our IP addresses, what network are we on, et cetera. And those blueprints then can be saved, shared, extended, copied, and cloned in a way that allows us to basically build from a base blueprint up across everything that we do in our stack that's repeatable. And over time, as you begin to automate different application components, it just becomes simpler for you then to build out a blueprint in the future. We also want to standardize the software stack, right? So some of this is, again, go back to that runbook discussion. Some of this is things that you would do out of a runbook, manual click, run a script here, provision a user there. And, you know, human beings get busy, they get interrupted at work, and a lot of times those things don't always get complete to 100%. The nice thing about automation is it does allow you to standardize, so every deployment is going to be the same. This is a double-edged sword, right? If it breaks for everything, but if it works, it should work for everything. And that way you're able to consistently deploy application components and virtual machines in a way that is mirroring your policy without having to worry about, you know, a human being missing part of the runbook or missing a step. The other thing is we want to make sure that we're not reinventing wheels. So VRA can leverage existing investments in configuration management tools that you have. So specifically, they have partnerships with Puppet Labs, OpsCode with Chef, and SaltStack. Because of the extensibility capability, then we can extend that to work with other configuration management tools. For example, Ansible, if that's something that you use, or in a Windows environment, something like Chocolate and NuGet. But the idea is then we can leverage those tools to essentially perform configuration management, which means that we don't have to rewrite all of that in workflow. We can leverage what's there. It helps with separation of duty, and then also allows them to remediate those configurations once the resources are deployed. So it doesn't require that you throw out automation tools and config management tools that you already have. VRA can easily hook into those and provide the same level of value through its orchestration engine by leveraging your existing investment. Finally, we have to deploy resources somewhere, and so VRA supports multiple destinations or endpoints. We've got physical servers that can be endpoints, so we can deploy physical machines with this tool if we'd like. We have virtual endpoints, which would be your vCenter, Hyper-V, Zen Server, and KVM. And then we have cloud endpoints. And again, native in the stack would be OpenStack, Amazon Web Services, the VMware Hybrid Cloud Service, any other VMware Cloud partner, and then Azure. So once we have those things in place, we choose our targets of where we'd like to be able to deploy, and then we can reuse our blueprints to deploy into a different target based on need. So if this application is a test application, we may wire that one to the cloud. If it's a permanent application, that may be wired to our on-prem virtual environment. So you get some flexibility there in the endpoints that you could deploy to. So when you kind of look at that, how does a larger organization take advantages across the board? There's some organizational changes that typically need to happen in the long run. Really you want to build a cloud team, and with that you have a cloud administrator, and that person is responsible for the blueprints, right? So what are the services that we're going to build? What's the catalog going to look like? Who's entitled to that? What are the policies around it? Where do the workloads land? And then we have different business units within the organization that would then use the VRA portal to provide a request. And so, for example, a dev test engineer might request, provision a new machine, manage it, and retire it as part of a process. For production, we have a little bit more there, right? We probably want to have a request submitted. We probably would like somebody to approve that request, then have it provisioned, and we want to manage it. When we retire it in production, we probably don't want to just throw the system away, so we can archive that system for a period of time in case we need to bring it back. And then when you look at desktop, very similar. We'd like to make a decision that we're going to request a new virtual desktop. We want to provision it. We need to manage it and archive it as well. So we can achieve those use cases by configuring the workflow, and we've got a lot of control over how we do that and what the endpoints are for the deployed workloads. Another thing that the tool really helps with, especially when it works with vRealize operations, is reclaiming inactive VMs and reclaiming resources within. So if we're able to look at a set of resources that aren't in use and they're underutilized, where a lot of times we need to shrink the number of CPUs or the amount of memory to get the most efficiency out of the hypervisor and our best density, VRA can automate that process through reclamation. And that will allow you then to achieve cost savings automatically without having to go and manage each individual system to do that. And when you combine it with VROps, it's just that much more intelligence that's built into the platform. We actually had one customer who recently did this and was able to cut back 20% of the resource utilization that they had in the environment. So 20% of the CPU and about 20% of the memory, and about another 25% of disk space, which translated into hard savings for them. So this is another use case of the automation platform itself. How it's achieving the network side, and again, why the SDDC Foundation is important, is there's native integration with NSX. Now, we can extend VRA to work with other things like Palo Alto or Cisco networking or Arista through its extensibility, but out of the box, we have baked in NSX integration. And what that's going to let us do then is create blueprints that include networking and network service rules. If you kind of look at how that would work, let's say we want to be able to dynamically provision an application as part of a blueprint, and maybe that application requires some sort of security group, a network profile that determines what networks it runs on, and a load balancer to load balance the application front end. We then specify those things in a blueprint. We then allow the cloud management platform to be the point of entry where we would request that application, and we dump that into the VRA service catalog. The user can then request that the application stack be deployed, and VRA will handle the deployment of the VMs, putting them on the appropriate networks, the configuration of the application components on top, and then the deployment of security policies, which include layer 4 stateful firewall, or up to layer 7 if integrated with a third-party system, as well as load balancing for that application. So you can kind of see just this alone in a traditional IT world, this would be about 5 different silos that would get involved. If you've got to put things in Active Directory, you need the team to get the right OU set up and the right computer accounts. If you need to get an IP address, your network team might have to go to the IPAM system, and then the firewall team is going to manage the firewalls and so on. And in a traditional deployment, that would take time because you generally do things sequentially, and you wait in between steps for people to perform the next task. So effort is small, but duration is large. And when we can automate that, we now shrink effort and make it even smaller, and then we shrink, obviously, duration because things are happening one after another programmatically. And because NSX can provide that network layer with and VC the storage, with SDDC, we have a full stack of infrastructure that can be easily automated. And when you look at the extensibility side of vRealize automation, what does that mean? Right? So one of the things that we can do is we can leverage your existing stack. There's no need to go to SDDC. It does make things very easy, and long-term is probably the right approach if you're going to take this automation path of the vRealize suite. But we can absolutely leverage existing resources, whether that's physical, virtual, or public cloud. We can actually configure then different business-related services. So, for example, we may only want certain people to have access to a specific catalog. Maybe we only want finance to be able to request a certain size of a VM. But for development, we want to open that up to multiple operating systems and things. We can also then begin to treat, if we desire to do this, the rest of the organization into business units, in the same terms that we want a cloud, provide resource reservations, and basically limit the amount that they can consume so that they can't request and deploy more resources than are what's available. We need to be able to integrate with third-party systems because that's what we do is we deploy resources manually. So that would include things like your CMDB, DNS, IPAM, et cetera. We also need to be able to add new services for day 2 operations. So examples of that would be patching the system, changing the configuration, or remediating a problem either automatically or manually. And then finally, we need to be able to call other services that are out on the web, or maybe they're internal, or maybe it's something that you've grown at home. So again, if it has an API, vRealize can be extended to take control of that. So you can do interesting things. You could use VRA to provision Office 365 accounts if you wanted to. It may not be a native thing, but once you learn how to extend the system, again, as long as there's an API or a capability of running a script, VRA can automate it. Now, the last use case, excuse me, is the automation for developers. And I'm not a big fan of these industry words like DevOps, but we're all familiar with that term. And right, so that really we kind of define DevOps as a mindset. It's really about efficiency and incremental change as opposed to big changes. And it's about making that process more efficient over time. So we want to drive down costs through making our development efficient, and we want to get code out to our customers for new features and things as quickly as possible. So VMware has created a product called CodeStream, which is now integrated into VRA. It's included in the enterprise licensing for the vRealize suite, and it runs right off the VRA appliance. And what that essentially allows us to do, for those of us familiar with the DevOps side of the house, is we want to be able to create a release pipeline, and we want to automate that release pipeline. So typically what you'll see with developers is they'll have a number of tools that are involved in their pipeline, and some of those things might be code sharing, some of those things might be management of compiled code and objects, automated testing platforms, or just testing in general. And everybody's sort of familiar with that normal process of let's develop the code, let's put it through, you know, a quick test to make sure it's functional, let's have user acceptance testing, and then when we're ready, we'll stage it into a production-like environment, validate it one more time, and stage it into production. What CodeStream allows you to do is automate that entire process. So it can provision clean VMs using VRA blueprints, where we can deploy our code initially and do our development. As we move from one stage to the next, we are deploying the full stack. So we're deploying clean new VMs, we're configuring those VMs and the software packages required to run on them, and then we're deploying our code on top. And we do that every single time. And as we go through those stages, if we know we can do a clean build that's automated every single time, we now have an update mechanism that doesn't require us to patch systems in place. So the next upgrade that we do can be a full deployment, replacing what's out there from scratch, which allows us to get the latest and greatest security patches and things in the operating system as well as the applications. And this really sort of matches what DevOps engineers are typically doing around continuous delivery. And really how it's doing is it's gluing together the existing tools. So we see a lot of logos there. If you're not a developer, don't worry about what they mean. Just know that these are tools that are very common for development shops to leverage. For example, Git is where we're doing team code collaboration. Selenium is a testing platform. Puppet is config management, and so on. But what CodeStream does is it integrates with all these different pieces to help build that pipeline. And so there's a number of out-of-box integrations which some of these logos represent. And then there's, of course, extensibility that you can provide on your own through scripting. So what vRealize automation is doing in this is providing the provisioning foundation. So, hey, we've got this app catalog or service catalog with VMs in it. We're going to consume that as part of our pipeline. And in that, we may have middleware, application components, other things that we extended to cloud services, and we can leverage all that in the pipeline. And then, of course, we can tie with that approvals at the virtual machine or application service level. When we look at then CodeStream, what it's doing is providing provisioning and release automation. So it's leveraging VRA for the provisioning automation, and then CodeStream itself is providing the function of release automation. So the screen, you see a list of all pipeline executions, what stage they're in, whether things have passed or failed. So we can track that across multiple environments and stages, which is something that's really difficult to do without a platform to help with this. We can trigger VRA blueprints within the different stages. Then we can automate other tests, like grab some artifacts, deploy them, and then test them to make sure that they work. We can also create automated rules that look at conditions from previous steps to move on to the next, or we can put manual gates in place that say, okay, dev is complete, we need a manual gate execution to approve the next stage. So you get flexibility on how that works. And when you look at some of the main components, integration points, so we've got a number of repositories that we can interface with. I'm not going to read them back, but on the list here. From a continuous integration orchestration perspective, there's a number of integrations available. There's some out-of-the-box testing frameworks available as well. And then obviously we can leverage VRA, we can leverage Pivotal Cloud Foundry, Docker, Puppet, Chef, Salt Stack, etc., to do some of the provision and configuration management. Finally, with change management, well, not finally, but change management here, again, to get entries into the CMDB and to interface with the service management platforms. And then here we have, issue tracking, which is important as well. So if you use Jira for issue tracking and so forth, we can leverage that as part of the pipeline execution automation. So realistically, then what you end up with is having some IDs and CI tools available for us that we can use to get status of things. cancel, pause, resume extraction, and trigger a pipeline. And then really this is what I think most of the developers that we've worked with really like about it is you get sort of this real-time tracking and dashboard that gives you a single pane view of all of the different pipelines that are being executed, where they're at, whether they've passed or failed. And then you can personalize that so that engineers see the things that matter to them and can basically consume published dashboards, whereas release managers can publish those dashboards and make them accessible to other development teams. This is just another way for you to get visibility into things. Also, historical analysis, right? So this will help us measure release efficiency and quality. One of the functions that my team has internally is development. And so we build applications, we help migrate people to cloud native, and in some cases we build automation and code. But we've got a number of these efforts all happening at once, and the tools that they use in the traditional stack are not good enough to get the reports we're looking for. CodeStream gives it to us out of the box. So we're able to take a look at historically what's worked, how long did it take, are our cards accurate, are we making sure that our difficulty levels are rationalized, and those sorts of things, as well as just looking at where everything's at in the process for deployment. Okay, accelerated value then. How do we get there quicker? So a lot of folks want to move to this model, but it takes a lot of planning and a lot of time, and in some cases can be extremely difficult without help and the right budget if you've not done it before. So realistically, then we look at how do we consume SDDC in general. And if you look at what Dell EMC are offering is on the far right of this spectrum. And so what we talk to customers about is these are your choices for how you consume SDDC. You can either build your own HCI and layer in a 6 on top. With that, you're going to have obviously the lowest capital expense, but you're going to have the highest operational expense. So you need to plan that out accordingly. You get a lot of flexibility in hardware choice, but it's up to you to support those individual components. So if low capital is an absolute priority, then this is a path that you can choose. Somewhere between them, we have validated HCI, which is where we're starting to leverage VCN ready nodes. So we at least have pre-built configurations that are easy to quote and configure and install. We know we're getting consistent build every time. That has still a low CapEx, a little bit higher OpEx side of it because there's less work to do, but still work that you need to do. And you still have pretty good flexibility and choice. But again, you have to sort of deploy it and manage it yourself. Sort of the third way is this validated SDDC, and this is really VMware Cloud Foundation. So you leverage ready nodes, and there'll be a higher CapEx associated with that because you're buying software, but your operational expense drops. The ability to schedule updates and just walk away is one of the main ways that happens in addition to the provisioning. And we have some larger customers that have full-time employees that do nothing but cycle through vSphere servers and update them. That function now is moved into software. So typically we'll say for the data center especially, validated SDDC is probably the starting point. Now, if you want to get the ultimate cloud experience, then the engineered system is the way to go. And how that's achieved is that even though we still have most of the intelligence in the software, the system still needs a rack, some servers, some hard drives, and some network switches. And when you buy an engineered system from Dell EMC, all of those things are included. So that would be VxRack SDDC. It's Cloud Foundation powered. It's going to give you higher CapEx because you're purchasing the integrated platform that's been tested and validated, but you're going to get the lowest operational expense. You're also going to have a little less flexibility because you're not going to be able to just throw whatever hardware you want in there. It's going to obviously be Dell EMC, but you're going to get the best support because you have one number to call. So if it is a top or rack switch problem, you don't need to make a separate call to Cisco or Arista. You can call EMC and they'll handle the problem for you. On top of that is what EMC is calling Enterprise Hybrid Cloud. And the simplest way to explain that, and there's a slide later on, I think it goes into more detail, but that's essentially layering all of the workload automation with VRA on top of Cloud Foundation and VxRack SDDC. So when it shows up on your floor, it's ready to go. There's pre-built blueprints to handle automation jobs that are common to the EMC components, but it's sort of a jump start to get right into automated infrastructure and workload automation all at once. And so when you look at Dell EMC's VxRack SDDC, it's fully integrated, it's fully tested, a lot of it's pre-built at the factory. Most of the value that you're going to get on it then once it's deployed is around the support. And this kind of overlays the support options for you. If you really just want to have basic support, you can do that. If you step it up to premium support, and this is again based on customer need, on the Premier side, you've got a dedicated advisor that you can talk to. You'll have weekly service request reviews. you'll get a twice-a-year operations review, twice-a-year business review, health checks, and remote change twice a year. And the remote change support is going to be providing an update for you. So if you want somebody, for example, to fire off the update and monitor it, you can put that through support. And so some of the things that happen there are good if you absolutely want to, if you traditionally are having issues with silent support calls and trying to bring multiple vendors together. This sort of solves that problem for you and gets you started with both the infrastructure automation and the workload automation right away. And that's where, enterprise hybrid cloud comes into play. So this is where we're adding in vRealize automation and some other things on top of VxRack SDDC. It's all pre-integrated, pre-tested, and supported as one experience. So this is the ultimate, I'll say, fast food approach. And if you can afford it, it's going to get you time to value quicker than any other option. Now, how we help people in this process is business alignment and risk reduction. And so on the business alignment side, we understand a couple things, right? One is where the industry is going. We're very close to the partners involved. But we also see where other people have tried and failed and made mistakes. So our main goal there is to help make sure we're aligning things to the business from the onset so that you don't have a failure due to misalignment to the business and lack of perception of value. Finally, we can help you reduce risk. So we've done this before. We're very familiar with the ins and outs of the systems and what works and what doesn't, some of the undocumented features. So we'll help you steer around the potholes, and we do that through a number of ways, right? One is to educate you on the platform from a pre-sales perspective. We can help you with professional services around plan and design. We can do very specific focused technical workshops. We have implementation services as well. And then we help accelerate cloud integrations by bundling and packaging common integrations together so that you can get them delivered quicker. So if you work with Rolta AdvizeX and you're interested in automation, reach out to your account manager and let's have a discussion. And finally, just to let you guys know that we are good at what we do, at least we think we are based on feedback from the partners. This is just more evidence of that, right? So in 2017, we won the America's Professional Services Global Innovation Award, as well as the America's Award for Partner Innovation. A lot of that driven from VMware based on the work we've done around automation at NSX. Of course, we've got other partners that we have experience with as well. So with that, I will pause for questions. And I don't see any in the list. So let me go ahead and just unmute all here, if it lets me.
Muted.
And it doesn't. Okay, well, I'll wait around here for a few minutes. If you have any questions, feel free to punch them into the questions box here while I struggle with this software to figure out if we can unmute everybody. Yeah, you may be able to unmute yourself as well if you'd like to ask a question. I don't think we have it blocked. So question about on SDDC, is that a separate license or do we need to ungroup our current license? The way that it works is the default license for Cloud Foundation includes vSphere Enterprise Plus, NSX Advanced, vCN Advanced, and SDDC Manager per socket. And obviously VMware recognizes that one, folks may need the enterprise features, and two, folks may already own those licenses and want to reuse them. So we can configure the SKU essentially to exclude one or more of those. So if you already own vCN, we can do it without vCN. If you already own vSphere and vCN, then you would get a Cloud Foundation SKU that just represents SDDC Manager and NSX for the licenses where you have overlap. There's also the ability through other SKUs to upgrade those individual components to enterprise. So you can do a VCF with NSX Enterprise, a VCF with vCN Enterprise, or a VCF license with both as Enterprise? That's a good question. The reason it's not just another add-on, I think, has a lot to do with how VMware does reporting of the product and investments. Okay, another question. Can Rolta AdvizeX advise on basic automation and not just VM automation? We are a VMware shop, but have a third-party automation manager. Absolutely. So obviously, this is a focused webinar around a Dell EMC VMware approach, but we have experience automating across a variety of platforms. So whether that's Microsoft or ServiceNow or just Linux and those sorts of things. So yeah, absolutely, you can advise on that. No problem. Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Thank you all very much for your time. If you think of questions later or just comments, anything, please reach out to Rolta AdvizeX account manager that helps you. And if you know who that is, just feel free to call our office number and we can have a discussion. Thank you for your time. Oh, here we go. We're getting education, Ohio State licensing from VMware. Can you do that pricing? Yes. Yes. So we have a number of educational and other organizations that buy off of that, and we're absolutely able to do that for you. No problem. Okay, I'll mute for another minute. If there's any more questions, I'll hang out to look for them. Otherwise, thank you all for your time.